Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Maeltopia podcast. For our oldest and most loyal listeners out there, we wanted to let you know about our new Patreon page. Outside of our careers and time spent with family, the three of us here at Maeltopia have been working every night and weekend for the past 5 years, building our company into what it is today. With your help, our goal is to make Maeltopia our livelihood, allowing us to bring you higher quality content, exciting new podcast series, and published works, and a large central community for you to take part in. As a thank you for your support, we're offering exclusive perks and bonus content, like early access to podcast episodes, behind-the-scene creator videos, and more. Go to patreon.com/Maeltopia today and explore our membership levels, and be sure to scroll through for free public content, some of which gives you a sneak peek at what you can expect when you become a member. From Mark, Steve, and Walker, thanks again for enjoying our podcast, and we hope to meet you soon on Patreon.
Look, Mother, I found these in a magical place in the woods. Aren't they beautiful?
The young girl proffered her mother a small tangle of thin, pale flowers, each one aglow with what seemed like displaced moonlight. Her mother took the flowers, almost cautiously, in her hand.
They're quite something to look at, aren't they, dear?
Kate commented, pondering the weightlessness of the little plants. Sampling their strong aroma, the scent of the bouquet was entrancing. They smelled as lovely as a full moon dressed in softest sky, glowing like a dream caught in tangles of night and cloud. Kate wondered at the uses for the dimly tangible thing. Perhaps they could flavor a brew, or maybe a pie. As culinary ideas poured from her head, she remembered that the day was young and many a chore needed tending. After shooing her daughter back outdoors, Kate placed the strange flowers into a vase, and for the most part, forgot about them. It wasn't until the middle of the following night that the flowers would be looked upon again. This time, it was William, the master of the house. He was chasing a sound that seemed to have escaped his latest dream. A white meadow sleeping quietly beneath the moon, where the night wind made whispers from the shadows. Those whispers led him into the kitchen, where the pale flowers seemed to smolder within a wan, white fire. At first, William thought the frail bouquet had been framed by an unusually bright ray of moonlight, but the moon was lost behind thick clouds. He placed a finger upon one of the glowing petals, and a vision of a woman flashed into his mind. She was dressed in brilliant light, with a pair of cold stars for eyes. William gasped, backing away from the vase of flowers. He wondered if he was awake. He shook his head, trying to dislodge any remaining dream. Retreating to his bedroom, he tried to convince himself it was merely a bit of late-night confusion. His dreams, however, remembered the cold-eyed woman and invited her inside for the night. The following day, Kate brewed the flowers into a tea. She sipped the drink while standing in the kitchen, gazing out the window. The cool flavor collapsed her focus beyond the swaying trees, beyond the window, to a place beyond the outdoors. Kate was startled into a mild awareness of her surroundings. Victoria had entered through the back door, humming, arms filled with pale flowers. The little girl sank her face into the reedy crowd of plants, drew a deep breath, and aimed the brightest smile she could manage at her mother.
They called to me, Mother. What was I to do but go to them?
Kate was still balanced upon the brink of dream, caught in the passage that led away from kitchens and daughters, incapable of enunciating any kind of clear response. Victoria noticed her mother's uncharacteristic vacancy and fell silent to better evaluate the strange repose. Kate's eyes fell into and out of focus, as if trying to resolve two worlds into view, but failing to clarify either. The vision was unfolding despite her attempts to focus on Victoria, form a single word, produce a viable thought, or remember who she was. The older woman, now realizing that something was very wrong, tried to push back the incipient phantasm, but she encountered overwhelming opposition from the potency of the strange elixir, and from her very will to refuse the gathering dream. She'd push Victoria out of the way, or worse, if it meant quickening the approaching sights. Something fluttered politely against the dark room, blotting out her daughter. who was now sobbing at her mother's bizarre behavior. The developing image drew itself together from raw sensory excess, distant memories and dreams, and from Kate's small imagination, which had nearly perished of idleness. A wave of wind and sound poured into the tiny room, coalescing into a shape that was, at first, not entirely inhuman. But it quickly informed its near humanity with unearthly extrusions, smoldering pinions of softest fire, whispering. The burning wings brushed Kate's cheeks, igniting dreams of summer afternoons filled with grumbling thunderstorms, swaying trees, gentle rain. The summer visions became a living thing, untried mystery became its soul. Kate stood in awe of the shimmering creature, now more than just posed atop prosaic reality, but entirely cultivated from the complete annihilation of her kitchen, her daughter, and perhaps her very self. All memory of her daughter was gone, the world obliterated. Kate collapsed to the floor, the solid, cold floor. Her memories of worldly solidity returned. She felt the soft hands of her daughter cradling her head. Kate contemplated, for the smallest moment, burning Victoria to smoking ash. Had her daughter's foolish wailing frightened away the dream? Kate was furious, breaking her daughter's gentle hold upon her head and returning to her feet. But renewed reality sought out the mother's senses, reawakening them to circumstance, such as it was within the silent kitchen. She looked down at her defeated daughter and felt a terrible remorse seize her throat. Kate immediately cast the flowers into the fire of the hearth.
What good is a world without perfect love?
William mumbled as he collected more of the glowing plants into his hand, stuffing them into his salivating mouth. He had left for the grove in the small hours of the morning, heavy with hopes of reconjuring the woman from his dreams. Kate had never cared for him as the shining woman had, nor loved him with such cold, glittering eyes.
What good is a world without perfect love?
He repeated, barely chewing enough to keep himself from choking as he gorged. William's hands shook as the vision laid him upon the ground. He sank down beneath the white banks of the grove, a pale crowd of soft flowers worrying at his temples. Outlining an expression of maniacal joy, his ever-widening jaw cracked as it overcame its natural limitations. The woman returned, her face cold and bright. She kissed his lips, sending a thin chill stealing into the bones of his face. William shivered from the coldest, brightest love he had ever known. The pale grove had become well known to the people of the small town. Its once secluded collection of soft flowers now bloomed across many planting fields and gardens. Nearly everyone had come to realize the potent gifts of the fey flowers. The townspeople gathered in strange places now, reciting to one another verses from their fairy journals, extolling the virtues of worlds and beings that had come to them through the medium of the great white flower. Very little else occupied the minds of the once sober people, and within a month the hamlet had become as abandoned as it was occupied, for its population was both present and absent. Most people lay for days, pulling visions from teas, cakes, and the eating of raw fey petals. At first, the dreams of the townsfolk were an entirely subjective affair, requiring the recitation of journal entries to share their strange and wonderful visions. But after a short time, the journals were abandoned. They could see each other's dreams, as plain as day. Henry arrived in the small town late in the evening, rivulets of fallen rain still wandering about the contours of his fedora, exhaustion hanging heavy upon his limbs. He walked to the front desk of the hotel and rang the service bell. The little instrument tossed silver bits of music into the stark silence, where they hung entirely too long, glittering. The young doctor removed his hat and waited for someone to answer his summons. Just before he felt it appropriate to ring the bell a second time, a thoroughly haggard-looking woman emerged from a side room. She was old but not elderly, wearing a straight gray line for lips, squinting through a pair of overly small eyes. Taken altogether, She appeared much like a poorly sewn-together doll. "I'm terribly sorry," Henry apologized, as he clearly awoken the small woman. From death, it seems, he mused to himself.
"How long will you be staying?"
She squawked, with no attempt at standard niceties. Taken aback somewhat, Henry readjusted the unexpected atmosphere of tacit rudeness, which was more likely the result of rural mannerisms than bad intention. "I haven't yet any specific idea, so... let's start with the next few days, shall we?" He spoke in his professional voice, hoping to combat the woman's initial shortness. A small but perceptible silence fell between them, lasting a bit too long than was customary for such perfunctory exchanges. Henry began to doubt his initial diagnosis for the woman's lack of manners, advancing an altogether less charitable hypothesis.
"Take the stairs into the second floor," the woman grumbled. "It's the last room at the end of the hall."
She handed Henry a key and departed to the side room without a glance back. "Ma'am," Henry called. I haven't yet paid for the room. Excuse me, ma'am." 3 sharp rings from the bell failed to bring her back. Confused, assuming that perhaps she intended to receive payment at the end of his stay, he shrugged and made for his designated quarters. The room hadn't been dusted in a while, but Henry liked the view enough not to care. The small town was quaint, with the sort of rustic feel he'd missed ever since his family departed the farm where he lived as a child. Sitting down at a small writing desk, he unfolded the correspondence that had brought him to the small town. "Dear Henry, certainly you must realize that I wouldn't lightly press you into immediate service, especially with such a distance to overcome, but I'm afraid things have advanced rapidly here, and not for the better. The people of this town have descended into a kind of madness brought on by the consumption of a strange plant, a plant that has exhausted my every analysis pertaining to its proper identification. This by itself would be enough to warrant official intervention, but there's something more here than merely the hallucinogenic effects of a heretofore unknown flora. Henry, I've seen things from those affected by this strange plant, things that could very well go beyond medicine. I daren't speak my suspicions aloud, but only confine them to the silence of my personal journal. For professional reasons, I should say no more until you arrive, as soon as you are able. Yours in truth and desperation, Dr. Marcus Tolliver." Henry looked again through the window, narrowing his focus to the streets and porches, looking for a living subject to analyze. There were none. Not a single person was about. Of course, the hour was a bit late, but some light still lingered, weak and drab, dripping down from the gray sky. Henry held completely still, listening for any hint of activity within the hotel. More silence. There was a shrillness to the quiet, as when the body refuses absolute silence its sway and substitutes a tinny ringing in place of a howling void. He decided that he'd sleep first and seek out Dr. Tolliver in the morning. It was just past midnight when crashing thunder brought Henry out of a deep sleep. The dissonance of storm and electricity began to fade into a subtle but entirely perceptible music. Henry wasn't sure if the music was coming down with the rain or from somewhere in the hotel. It was gentle and warm, the glow of a candle in the dark. The doctor rose and dressed himself, moving to the hallway with caution as the lights blinked on and off, almost in rhythm with the strange music. He put his ear to several of the rooms he passed, just the silence of empty spaces. He descended the stairs like a child, worried at the prospect of being discovered out of bed at such a late hour. The music grew louder as Henry neared the lobby, but not because the sound was concentrated there. The music seemed to drift down from above, from no fixed point. Henry rounded the corner and gazed upon the unmanned front desk, turning his eyes to the closed door from whence the only living person he encountered had emerged. It was too late to try the bell, so he made his way to a small dining room where more permanent boarders might take their meals. He was surprised to see a person wearing a strange mask seated at a small table, apparently enjoying a cup of coffee or tea. Henry wondered how they sipped their drink while wearing an all-concealing mask. The facade appeared unlike any he'd seen before, as it possessed no definitive connection to any myths or folklore he was aware of. It appeared to be a gestalt of small demonic faces comprising one gigantic demonic face. Below the mask, the figure was dressed in a man's business suit, replete with tie and polished shoes. The person's hands were asexual, merely hands in the most basic sense, resting comfortably around a steaming blue mug. While it was certainly unusual to see a person wearing a monstrous mask in the middle of the night, during a hellacious storm no less, the doctor wouldn't have been so quick to label them a lunatic before the letter he'd received from his friend and colleague. Judging by the person's build and fashion of dress, Henry took the person for a man, though he chose not to address the stranger as such. The mad could be rather chimeral. A woman could very well lurk behind the mask. "Hello, did the storm wake you as well?" Henry queried, careful to treat the stranger with a gentleness deserving of clinical sensitivities. The mask had no eye holes, so the anxious doctor was forced to set his gaze into the shallow recesses of the man's second face. "Quite the contrary, my good man. I came out to enjoy this storm. That thunder is just magnificent, isn't it?" A man's voice. Henry was relieved for the sliver of certitude. "Oh yes, it's quite boisterous indeed. My name is Dr. Henry Foster. I just arrived here this evening from Boston. Are you a guest of the hotel as well?" Another overlong silence. After a full minute, the man responded, I don't think so." Henry was convinced he was speaking to a lunatic. Marcus should have at least intimated the scale of this madness, he thought, growing more frightened by the moment. He was accustomed to speaking to mad persons from the other side of steel bars, with more divergent patients being wrapped in taut leather straps. This one was out in the open, just sitting there, drinking a coffee, sporting a demonic mask. Henry began to back out of the room, offering a nervous smile as he withdrew.
Would you like a cup of coffee?
He heard a woman's voice ask. He was nearly out of sight of the insane man, but he could have sworn the voice came from behind the mask. He scanned the room for another speaker. There was only the masked man. The voice was full-bodied and richly textured, pure female. Henry began to sweat as he shot a look in the direction of the front desk, hoping to see the absurd woman from earlier. No one.
I could get you a cup if you'd like.
The female voice was definitely coming from behind the mask. Madness could certainly give rise to singular, even inhuman talents, and this lunatic had clearly mastered the aping of the female voice. Simple as that, the doctor concluded with no small amount of desperation. Why yes, Henry responded. That would be wonderful. He hoped the madcap would leave the room, providing him a chance to escape without being seen. The masked man nodded, pushing the blue mug in his hands across the table towards Henry. There you are. Haven't taken even a sip of it. I don't know why I poured it, to be honest. The man's voice again. Well, only if you're sure. Henry began to shake. I insist. Henry drew towards the disturbed man, expecting to fend off an attack. As he inched forward, he began to notice the peculiar aroma of the coffee, a distinctly floral scent, sweet as an early spring. He recalled another portion of his friend's correspondence, the as-of-yet unidentified plant that was driving everyone mad. My, what a pretty-smelling coffee, Henry remarked. Tell me, what blend is it? Can't say that I know, the man replied. It's something prepared locally, I believe. It's quite popular around here, and quite tasty. Unfortunately, I don't think I should try it, Henry demurred. The smell of flowers is strong, and I'm quite allergic to a great many flowers. The lunatic did not respond, but only stared, presumably, at him. After another long pause, the man inclined his head towards the coffee, nudging it a bit closer. I'm sure it's fine. It's delicious. Time seemed to disintegrate beneath the madman's gaze, evaporating seconds into a seamless oblivion. As the doctor calculated his options, Movement from beyond a nearby window caught his attention. It was the woman from the front desk, either dead or sleeping, stretched between two ridiculously attired persons. The individual holding her feet was impossibly tall, appearing to possess glowing insect wings that made a distinct buzzing sound as they passed by the window. The person at her head was covered completely in dark, billowing silks, yet something glowed from within, and a small stream of colored mist leaked from beneath the strange apparel. Visibly shaking, Henry hadn't reckoned the scope of the outbreak of madness, unless he'd been tricked into ingesting the strange plant without knowing it. He couldn't decide which was more likely, but either way, the world was growing stranger by the moment. The masked man began to vibrate as if repressing mounting rage. Henry stammered out sounds that might have been words, but before he could compose a sufficiently compelling plea, thunder crashed throughout the dining room. Rising from the table, the lunatic seized the cup of coffee and stormed into the next room. Henry was on the verge of regaining a small bit of composure when the lights went off. The preceding click signaled that the blackout wasn't from the storm. The sanctuary of the hotel vanished with the lights, and the walls and ceiling opened to the unknown appetites of hidden things. The music from the sky had stopped. There was only the pulse of the storm and the din of shadows. Henry backed into the nearest corner, huddled into a ball, and waited to be killed. Thank you once again for listening to another episode of the Maeltopia podcast. To help us grow and spread the word, we'd love nothing more than for you to like, comment, rate, and review us on iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. You can also connect with us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and tweet us on Twitter for the latest original artwork and important updates. And for even more about our ever-growing literary world, head to Maeltopia.com to read our dark fiction and gain access to giveaways and discounts with our newsletter.